Today, I am joined by a familiar face. It's Brandon Bedford, the competitive enablement manager at Klue. Brandon, thank you for joining me.
Of course, always happy to be here.
What is this? Is this your third episode, third appearance now? That might make you the
I think so. I guess I have an unfair advantage being at Klue, but
I don't know if that's unfair advantage or just me slacking you constantly. Like, yep, you need to come on next week's episode, open your calendar, and I just throw it in there. So it depends. And we're not just joined by Brandon. We also have a special guest, and that is Tim Rhodes, the head of competitive intelligence consulting at Appraise 360. And he also has, how many years of experience do you have building compete programs and working in competitive intelligence at this point?
I was thinking about that question, and unfortunately it's 20.
20 years?
20 years, yeah, going back to 1998.
Wow.
So, yeah.
Obviously, we have a wealth of experience here. Tim has kindly agreed to join us for a special episode. We are doing a mailbag edition of the CE show today. And that's because a lot of folks during our live sessions or just shooting me messages on LinkedIn and emails, they're asking questions about running compete. And I thought you always want to answer the audience's questions. So we picked about 5 or 6. We'll see how many we get to. We'll see how many rabbit holes we go down. But we're just going to dive right in. I'm going to kick this one off with a question from Alan. And he asked me, how are you watching competitors and customers, especially in recessionary times? This is a topic that I think everyone's seen throughout. I scroll through my LinkedIn and it's how to do X in recessionary times, uncertain markets. But I think in the context of compete, this is incredibly important. So Tim, what's your take on this? I know I don't want to say the word. I don't want to say the word recession. We're going to use the word uncertain times.
Perfect.
But when the market is in a state of potential volatility, how do you compete?
So, I given the history that I was just telling you about, unfortunately, I've seen some of these cycles, and a big one was in 2008 with the housing. We won't call it a crisis, right? The housing situation that we had that impacted the market. One of the things that we saw there, and we've seen in times of market uncertainty, is an increase in losses to the incumbent solution. We call these do nothing losses, right? Where a business will come into a sales opportunity thinking they can, create some sort of value by using your product, but at the end of it, for whatever reason, they decide to do nothing. And so I'm starting to see a lot of this with my clients, where their quote unquote do nothing losses are lost to incumbent, which was typically around 20, 25%, really double. We're starting to see 35, 40%, losses to the incumbent. So this is really concerning because sales reps are entering into sales cycles and end up having to, go through them all for the customer to do nothing. Of course, there's an opportunity to come back and retarget those later, but that's one thing to think about and really understand, especially from top of the funnel. How can we focus on that? The second thing is if you're in a marketplace that has large incumbent platforms, healthcare technology, services technology, IT, we're starting to see more and more of these platform competitors come in with very narrow offerings, but be able to take deals away because of the economics from a platform. Let me give you an example. One of my clients is in the healthcare space, and they're starting to see large platforms come in and take over deals that have a component of what they offer, but not as deep. But they're able to come in with these platforms and offer, greater economics, more functionality, be able to compete on total cost of ownership. So in situations where you have these platform competitors like Salesforce, Microsoft, ServiceNow, where typically you might have a greater win rate, those are ones that I would really pay attention to start monitoring and see what they're doing that is offering competitive functionality where you wouldn't normally consider them.
Why do you think that is? Because I think when you talk about sort of potential legacy competitors, there's often that saying, like, you don't get fired for choosing IBM. You don't get fired for choosing the incumbent. And is that kind of part of the rationale, do you think, from buyers right now, especially when maybe purse strings are a little bit tighter than they once were? It's like, I could pick this, I don't want to say the word niche, but this more niche option, but sure, this is the brand name that we all know and recognize. I'm not in the hot seat for picking that.
I think that's part of that. I think the other part of it is not really understanding the total cost of moving or of selecting a new vendor. There's costs with data management, of bringing the data in, of onboarding, of training, of implementation and integration that oftentimes customers don't consider till they're halfway through a sales cycle. And so it's easier just to do nothing and stay with what you're doing, right, and push it off for 2 to 3 years, to not have to take on that cost or not take on that issue of what you're talking about in terms of internal career, professional, reputation concerns from taking something on, right? And then there's just the overall cost. But one of the interesting things about these platform players, say, ServiceNow, Salesforce, Microsoft, Workday, if you're in HCM, in HR, they're starting to expand significantly, and they come in with an amazing value proposition that can box out the competition very effectively by saying, look, we can solve this entire issue for you. Yeah, we may not have the depth, but we have the breadth, and we can do it, at half the cost if you were just choosing a, applicant tracking system or this specific piece of HR technology. And in times like now where there's uncertainty, that can be really appealing, to have one vendor that covers all of this. And then there's, of course, behind that, all of the value around data management and those types of things. And starting to see a lot of platform competitors that we haven't seen before come in and really impact competitive win rate.
Tim, I love that you've kind of provided sort of a big picture there of what's happening, especially in the current state of the market. Let's put on your compete hat here, Brandon. As someone, if you're someone that is running compete at an organization that might be in trouble, or they're dealing with these legacy competitors that are offering a broader set of functionality, what would you do? What's your approach then to, because you got to keep competing. It's not time to just pack up shop, go home, admit defeat. So what would you do?
Totally. And I just want to firstly state that I think Tim, what you mentioned is super insightful and spot on. I think just if you follow that advice of focusing on incumbent solutions or status quo, and also looking at maybe those older school competitors that are platform plays, those are two really actionable things you can do right away. For our own competitive landscape, we don't have as many Microsofts or ServiceNows kind of in Klue's competitive landscape, but I think that is certainly applicable for, if that applies to your industry. So maybe just from my perspective, I'll share more on the status quo piece. There's kind of three, I guess, elements or portions of the sales cycle that we want to enable the team on, which is, why change? Why now? So why do they need to make that change now? And then why Klue? And you could argue competitive enablement really fits into that third bucket. But I do think competitive enablement stretches across that. And I think another way I like to think of what you described, Tim, is there's this shift towards a much greater focus on why change, why change at all, in large part, again, due to greater uncertainty, tighter budgets. People are just maybe more risk averse generally during these times. And so a lot of the enablement we're doing right now is around that why change piece, which can take, maybe I'll give a tactical example, really enabling our customer facing teams, sales, customer success, account managers, to be able to build a business case, to be able to show either to an existing client or a potential new client, hey, here's the actual return on the investment. Here's how we can get closer to, revenue impact or cost savings, because that's ultimately what's going to help determine that why change decision. And I think in doing so, you can also influence the why Klue decision, right? If I use the example of a new customer that's like looking into a competitive enablement platform for the first time, there is certainly value that we can provide by helping them build out that business case, which can help with the why Klue decision as well. So I think there's something interesting to be said around, and I'm a bit of a macro nerd. I love following, venture capital valuations and the markets and stuff kind of, in my own time, but it's also relevant to compete. I think the interesting angle there is when we move into a kind of period of uncertainty like this, and again, no one really knows how long or how deep this period could be. There is an opportunity to find intelligence in that kind of sphere where there maybe wasn't when, liquidity is cheap and money is flying around everywhere. So to give an example, like there's oftentimes smaller competitors might start getting acquired during this time. To your point, Tim, as well, those incumbent players might start expanding or continue expanding and grabbing market share from like adjacent spaces that maybe aren't their core competency because they're leveraging that period of uncertainty. Or just, a more straightforward one is you can often find maybe signals of distress from competitors, right? Competitors that maybe are divesting from certain areas of their business. And that can really help you find and craft further ways to differentiate potentially to those competitors. You can keep your eyes out on the market to find companies that maybe are struggling, and that can be reflected in where they're investing, slowing hiring, divesting from certain areas, et cetera.
Tim, I got one final kind of quick question on this topic before we jump to some of the other mailbag questions. That why change piece, you mentioned it's tough to compete against the status quo right now in this time. How are you helping some of your clients tackle that?
I think to Brandon's point, around building a business case is really important. One of the things that we're doing is building what we're calling champion kits. And what this is that we're enabling, my client's customer champion to then go and sell on their behalf internally, right? Whether it's an economic buyer or peers, and enabling strong differentiation within that champion kit. So it automatically answers the question, not only why change, but why us, why this vendor, and really taking the time to go in and be thoughtful and thinking about differentiation across your competitive landscape, but your top competitors, and really building that into those business value cases or these champion kits.
I think what both of you and Brandon touch on, especially with the champion day, is that level of personalization. It's really taking that extra step, that extra effort to really win that deal cycle, because otherwise, if it's just you've both had the similar sales cycle, they're going to go to the legacy. Like that's, right. Again, you're not getting fired going that way. That was more of a macro question. We've got some more specific ones from the listeners here. I have one from Griffin who asked, what do you do to effectively enable intel or feedback sharing? So how are you crowdsourcing competitive intel from within your own organization? We know that's some of the most valuable intel, but it's also, I don't think it just comes to you. You don't just wake up as the CE manager, Brandon, gets out of bed and it's just everyone flooding your inbox with everything the competitors are doing. Or hey, maybe it is. I don't know. So Tim, what's some of the strategies that you use to enable that piece?
So kind of putting my hat on, I was the head of competitive intelligence at Eloqua and the Oracle Marketing Cloud after Oracle bought Eloqua. And so we had a very large sales team, about 3,000 worldwide, which is great, but also difficult as well. But amazing amounts of, what I call sensors, right? That you can pick up and pieces of the puzzle to be able to put together. So this is where having very strong relationships with your sales team and sales leaders is very, very important. But you've got to build that foundation in order to get that information. So it starts when you get into that organization as a new hire or into that role, spending the time to develop those relationships and really demonstrate value. Because in my experience, sales reps, they don't have the time to stop and participate in competitive intelligence on a significant basis. So you've got to help them to understand that this is going to actually provide value to them. It's like the Jerry Maguire saying, "If help me, help you," right? And so it's early on developing those relationships. You've got to do that. Secondly, more tactically, is creating opportunities to share that information in contacts. So there's a lot of great tools out there. Klue is one of them to be able to offer and collect information. Slack channels. But one of the things I found to be most effective is inserting myself into the daily operations of sales teams. So into their sales training, QBRs, to be able to not only collect information, but also be able to offer value. One of kind of my secret tools that I've used when I've been at an organization is what I call drop-in sessions. And at Eloqua and Oracle, and when I was at CA, we had these on Fridays at 9 a.m. And it's a 30-minute drop-in session. And reps can bring a deal and talk about, the competitiveness and how do I position against this competitor. What's great about that is while you're helping them, you're also collecting information about how the competition is positioning against your product. And that's very effective. So it's an opportunity to really provide, double value of not only help your sales team to push to win on deals specific situations, but collect that information, right? And that's a great kind of tool that I've used, throughout my career.
I think Tim nailed it again. I think it's, what I had written down in my notes was exactly those things. First, it's all about building relationships, right? You have to have that relationship with sales, customer facing teams, to create that kind of how, help me help you kind of feedback loop. And ultimately that is the truth. And just to expand on that a bit, right? Like we're collecting intel because we want to help enable the team. Like that's genuinely what we are doing. It's not just to collect it and hoard it. So sometimes it just requires that kind of clear messaging around like, hey, this is actually going to help you win more deals and win more business in the case of sales. Or from product managers, right? When they're doing their product research for the roadmap, it's like, hey, I've done a lot of this research and I can help you in your research projects. So you're spending less time, whatever that benefit is, just making sure that's communicated well. I love the idea around getting more tactical and getting into the daily workflows of, in the example of sales reps joining deal desk, pipeline review meetings, sales meetings, trainings. We have a similar kind of system actually, Tim, here at Klue, where we have we call it pipeline review, where open season for reps to share what's going on in their deals, in their pipeline. And it's not always competitive in nature, but I always like to be there just to listen in, again, to collect intel, but also share a take and provide that kind of, hot seat, almost consulting or guidance in that moment. One of my biggest sources of intel I find is customers that recently switched from another solution, a competitor solution, to your own solution. It's like the perfect storm for competitive intelligence. You have a customer that was unhappy with the competitive solution, presumably if they switched and they migrated. They're fresh in that process, so they're working through learning the new solution and offboarding from the previous one. A lot of people like to ask, oh, how do we get, intelligence on a competitor's product functionality? And I always kind of challenge that and say, is it really the product functionality you want to understand, or is it what customers like or dislike about that functionality? And resoundingly, it's the latter. And with those customers that have switched, that's where you can get that really juicy intel. Like, the solution did this, but we didn't like it for this reason, and we liked it for this reason. It's like, it's basically a win-loss interview. In terms of the sales side, I think you nailed it, Tim, around building yourself into particularly sales as workflows, right? Sellers are busy. They want to sell. And so there is a kind of give and take there where we kind of have to come to them a little bit, such that they also will be more likely to share, via the Slack channel or via an email forward, when those things come up as well.
Adam, one little trick I was thinking about when I was at Eloqua, our number one competitor was Marketo, right? And what I decided to do is I had the Friday sessions, but I needed more real-time information. And so I built out what I called the sales SWAT team. And this was 8 reps worldwide that I recruited. And what I did is I ran a CRM win rate analysis and recruited my top sales reps that had the top win rate into this quote unquote SWAT team. And I made it fun. I got everyone these buttons. I don't know if you can see it. But, they were all certified Marketo hunters, and they put it on their, lapel. So there was this sense of belonging, and it was fun. And we would meet every 2 weeks for 30 minutes, again, at a time that they weren't selling, and just talk about what they were seeing. And so, out of the 8, 6 would show up, but it was a great mini focus group. And we did it every 2 weeks, and those sales reps loved it. And I started getting requests from the broader sales team. I want to be a part of that. Well, here's what you got to do. And you make it fun. And these stupid little buttons, everyone wanted one of these things, the 25 cents for this, and just gamifying it, making it fun. But the value we got out of that every 2 weeks was amazing.
You could make them into an NFT, Tim.
There you go.
That could have been your opportunity many years ago. You could have been the first one in.
Dang it.
Love that though. That's such a great idea. And we do a similar thing. We call it the pod. I might have to steal that the button pin idea though, Tim. That's awesome.
I love it. And actually on our last podcast episode with Jen Roberts, who is awesome, literally talked about this kind of SWAT team pilot group. She talked about in the context of being able to measure your success, prove out competitive enablement is actually improving the success of your reps and marketing efforts. But in terms of intel collection, I love that. And it's like such an organic way to build a relationship. All right. So we've gone high level. Now we've zoomed in a little bit. And here's something that is very specific. So this is from Scott. And he was talking about competitive newsletters. Now, Brandon, you run an awesome competitive newsletter at Klue. I'm a big fan. And he said, if you're creating a competitive newsletter and it's in regards to a product release from a competitor where it honestly, let's be transparent, it pulls them ahead of you. How would you go about sharing that with the organization in the newsletter and kind of bigger picture as well?
The takeaway I would share there is, yes, like you said, first and foremost, you don't want to bend the truth or like try to come off like you're avoiding a situation. The flip side of that though is that there is a kind of different lens on that intelligence that sales might need versus what customer success might need versus what product needs versus what your executive team might need. And I think that's where, in the newsletter, you kind of, it obviously depends how you set up your newsletter. You could set up, if you have a very complex program, maybe you have newsletters for multiple teams. We at Klue, we decided to send out a newsletter to the entire organization. So I do have to kind of manage those multiple lenses and create messaging that's not only relevant for everyone, but like you said, doesn't kind of mince words too much. And so what that ends up being, in my opinion, is like kind of what is it? What's the product release? And then what are we going to do about it? In our why it matters section in Klue, I'll often include here are the areas where, they maybe come out on top, but I always leave it with a positive kind of, here's what we're doing about it, either from our own product release standpoint or from a enablement and positioning standpoint, right? Like there is always that layer of, how to frame a product release and how to really, leverage that in a deal cycle. And so I guess what I'm trying to get at is I don't want to leave on a poor note because it is a newsletter that's going out to the full org. And again, that's specific to Klue, but it would obviously take that with a grain of salt, depending on how your newsletter is set up. However, the one thing I'll add is while my newsletter is kind of saying, hey, here's the summary, here's the, spark notes, I guess, of what it is, why it matters, the strengths and weaknesses. I'm also leveraging, other communication channels via Klue, but chatting with those specific teams that need to be in the know. So in this example, if there was a product release, I would be creating a channel with the product team to say, hey, you saw my digest, here's maybe a little bit more color on like why this is a big threat. And really focus in on, okay, I need to meet with the product team now to build that out. Or another, obviously a more relevant example perhaps would be meeting with the executive team. If this was like a really big release, right? Maybe Microsoft is entering your space, right? There's this kind of strategic landscape angle to it. I would craft a message for the executive team. We have our own, like, another Slack channel. We're big Slack users here at Klue, but there's the competitive intel channel where everyone's discussing, and then we have competitive task force, which is where, select people are there to make sense of something before maybe it goes out to the full organization. Not to say that you should do all these things all at once, but just kind of sharing, one for a broad newsletter for the entire org. Don't mince words, talk about strengths and weaknesses. But if there is like a real risk there, or there's something that really does take that competitor to the next level, definitely take those conversations and work with the groups that need to know that, whether that's product or marketing from a positioning lens, or the executive team, et cetera.
When Brandon said you can't mince words, that's really important, because when I'm working inside of an organization, my job is to help that company win. And so I have to help the company, my sales reps, my account executives, not only position to win, but identify those areas that they have to defend against, to guide those sales reps into a position that they can effectively sell. So understanding those weaknesses are really, really important, in communicating those so that the sales team can be prepared for those questions and adequately have an effective answer for that. And so, one of the things I always think about is something like that, in a battle card or another format, I'm always going to talk about, here's what it is. Now, here's what you're going to do about it. Providing that next layer of consultative, approach of, here's not only how to position to win, but, here's what you're going to have to defend against. And here's some ideas on how to defend against it specifically.
It's acknowledging the elephant in the room, but not letting it linger, not letting that thing, you can't sit and stare at the boogeyman for too long, because that just causes that paralysis within the organization. And it's on the complete professional to be the person that's in the know on these things and be the calming presence that's like, yes, we've acknowledged it. This is what we're going to work on here. I know, Brandon, you've done the same when there's not necessarily in this context of a big product release, but there's something that just drops unannounced into the competitive intel channel. There might be a little fire emerging of people being like, what's this? What's this? And it requires that person running compete, who's monitoring this on a daily basis, who's on top of it, to calm people down and then provide that context.
One of the ways in which almost every organization we speak with is the same is around this event where something really critical happens. From like the small companies we work with, where it's like one person like myself leading a compete program, all the way up to some of the largest enterprises where they have a team of people. It's interesting that when that important event happens, the first thing they do before maybe even going to the executive team to like get the take or, prepare the intel digest, it's, hey team, we see this, we're on it. There's this kind of like notification, because exactly what you described, Adam, like when something big like that happens, the last thing you want is people worrying or stressing about it, or from that maybe coming up with their own responses, and then you get misalignment across the org, especially in sales where confidence and morale is infectious, right? And so there is this kind of immediate notification you want to send, again, not just for a product release, but I shared this I think in a prior pod, but one of our competitors, Compite, was acquired last quarter, or maybe I guess 2 quarters ago now. But there was just a moment of like, hey, we see it, we're on it. Like, don't worry about it. We're going to have a response to this and we're going to analyze it. And, even in kind of the best sales orgs where you're absolutely crushing it, or like those events can cause a bit of anxiety. And so I think there's that piece where, of course, the end result, you definitely don't want to mince words, back to that piece, but there is that kind of temporary moment when you're kind of crafting the response that you want to also say, hey team, like, we're on it.
I kind of think about when I was at CA Technologies, IBM had launched this new program to migrate SAP data over to IBM. And our sales team was freaking out because it was increasing competitive win rate. And so we kind of thought about it. We got in a room and we dissected what was happening. And what we realized is that this was a service. This was not technology. And we're able to pin the story and show the effectiveness of CA, being able to do that same thing automatically, being able to bring data over automatically, and not having human intervention, which causes errors and problems and cost and management. And we're able to effectively respond to that. And I think for me, it's having a response, not letting that product release or whatever that competitive advantage is go. You've got to have some sort of response, and sitting down and strategically thinking about it, putting your consulting cap on. And if I was in that sales rep's seat, what would I say? What would I do? And deconstructing that, again, guiding the sales team, not only positioning to win, but how to defend against, and finding those opportunities of using jujitsu, of taking your competitors strengths strengths and your weaknesses, and turning them on their head and making it your advantage.
We've hit time. I have so many more questions. That one went by so quickly. So I think that means that we have to do a part 2 of this mailbag. I've got plenty more for the both of you. But
it'll be fun.
Producer Ben in the background said we have to be tight today. He was cracking the whip on me. So Tim, Brandon, I appreciate both of you coming on today. There was a ton that we got into, and I can't wait for us to do this again. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, likewise. Always happy to be here.
And we'll catch everyone next week.